Okay, welcome. So thank you all for joining Museum Hue today in partnership with the National Council on Public History. My name is Addison Tobias, and I'm the programs manager at Museum Hue. For those of you that are new to Museum Hue, we are a member-driven organization based in New York City that is dedicated to uplifting the voices of people of color in the arts and culture field by offering tools and resources in a supportive environment. So for those of you that have been to our first kickoff session, welcome back. And for those of you that are new, we are so excited to have you here today. Today's session is the second of 4 virtual workshops that consist of conversations and presentations led by professionals and experts in the field who are really going to provide some insight into their career path. Today's session is all about resume, cover letter, and application best practices. And so I'm really excited to get into this conversation. I see Marilyn. Welcome. Thank you for joining. Before I introduce our exciting speakers today, I just want to let everyone know that if you are not already a member, we hope that you can consider becoming a member. For just $20, you can purchase an early career membership, and that will give you access to various professional development programs, resources, all past programs, recordings, free admission to a lot of our events based in New York City and virtual. And the rest of these workshops that will be accessible and will take place in November and December. You will also have access to the Museum Hue job board to look for different job opportunities and such. So we really encourage you to look into it. So now I am going to introduce our 3 speakers today before we kick off today's session. So I will first start by introducing Meghan Hillman. Meghan, if you want to give a little wave, thank you for being here. Meghan Hillman has been the program manager of the National Council on Public History since 2017. She's previously been with the organization almost 10 years, having served as a program assistant and graduate intern. Meghan is attaining her master's in public history this fall after finishing the program's coursework back in 2015, and has a BA in history and English literature from Denison University. NCPH just hired their first new staff member in years, a marketing and publications contractor. So her experience is super fresh in sorting through 130 plus resumes and cover letters. So thank you for joining us today, Meghan. And then next, I want to introduce Kathleen Powers Conti. Kathleen, if you want to give a little wave. As a public historian and preservation professional, Kathleen consults on projects across the U.S. and is an assistant professor of history at Florida State University and an affiliated faculty at the Native American and Indigenous Studies Center. Her research spans across the Americas and former Soviet Union, focusing on how to preserve and interpret places of difficult heritage, sites of trauma, contested history, or atrocities. She frequently consults for the National Park Service, such as developing new treatment options to protect cultural landscapes at risk of disasters resulting from climate change. In light of her work, the president of the National Council on Public History appointed her as co-chair for their consultants committee to develop guidelines for best practices for consulting historians. So thank you so much for joining us today, Kathleen. And last but not least, I want to introduce Sierra Van Ryck DeGroot, who is the Deputy Director of Museum Hue. Sierra, if you want to give a little wave. Sierra is a proud alumna of the Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Leadership Program at Seton Hall University and Bank Street College of Education. Sierra has her bachelor's in art design and interactive media, fine arts and art history, and a master's of education in museum education. She's a current board member for the New Jersey Association of Museums and participating in many side quests related to advocating for change in the GLAM sector, specifically in museums around salary transparency, actionable equity in hiring, the abolition of unpaid internships, and the practice of rest for all museum workers. So it's clear we have a really, really exciting panel today where we will get to hear from these experts about best practices in the field when it comes to updating your resume, cover letters, and applying to various types of jobs in the arts and cultural field. I now want to pass this over to our Deputy Director of Museum Hue, Sierra, to kick off this conversation.
Thank you so much, Addison. And I have to shout out my team. Sorry, folks. Addison is our programs manager and just like really killing it. She put together this program. So I just want to thank her so much for her work on this. And then you may also recognize another Museum Hue face, Amanda Thomas, who is our membership and communications manager. So if you have any questions about joining Museum Hue, or even just if you are posting about this, feel free to tag Museum Hue, and Amanda will be the person who is sharing that. And thank you, Amanda, for joining us this evening. It's not rare that the team is working late, but I love to see them. So it's a treat. Um, so to kick things off, I really wanted to make space for Meghan and Kathleen to kind of share about their experiences, especially with Meghan having had just hired a new member of her team. And Kathleen is going to give us a little bit of that freelance consulting perspective as well. And then I'm going to kind of round things out with all of my hot takes on being on both sides of the hiring and the as well as the person being hired process, as I'm fairly new to Museum Hue and I work with a lot of emerging professionals who are also looking for work right now. So I've heard, unfortunately, many stories to share. Um, but to kick things off, I want to talk to Meghan. Meghan, tell us
Ooh,
like tell us the hot deets.
the hot deets. Okay. So I've hired with NCPH two times. We hired a membership coordinator back in 2019. Yeah, it was the end of 2019, and then she started right before the pandemic. And then like literally the month before. And so we went through the whole, applications and hiring process with her, and then many years passed. And then over the summer, we hired a contract, like 18 months um, marketing and publications coordinator position, and that was designed to be a remote position. For context, NCPH has a staff of 3 full-time people. Then we have a 20-hour a week graduate assistant that comes to us through IUPUI, our university. And then now we have a 20-hour a week sort of contract position that we are hoping to turn into a full-time position. Um, because we are at the university, we're sort of like housed in their history department. We have a complicated hiring process. Like for a full-time position with benefits, it would have to go through the university very formally, and it would need to, like right now, there's a hiring freeze at the university. So we had to sort of create a contract position to fake our way through that and be able to hire what we needed to hire. We ended up getting 134 applications. Um, I looked through every single one of them personally. More, not just me. We had a whole little hiring team. It's me and Stasia, our um, membership coordinator, and a couple of folks from the History at Work blog that NCPH sort of, it's like a peer edited blog that we run, because this person was going to be working really closely with the editorial team there to sort of guide pitch posts through from the pitch to post process. So we all had like a really elaborate ranking system where we like sorted and compared, and then our executive director weighed in. It was a lengthy process. We ended up interviewing, I think, 5 or 6 people out of those 134. But honestly, 100 of those applications were good. Like we could have hired 100 of those people and been satisfied, which is beautiful. Like you love to have choice. Like it feels great to be able to hire like your dream candidate, which we did. But it also sort of is depressing, like when you think about the field and all of these amazing um, candidates who could be doing this work, right? And I do think we had like I think the hourly salary was like $23 an hour, so relatively good for a fairly entry level contract position, but like no benefits. Like that's a 20-hour a week job. We were very surprised by the turnout, and it got us really thinking about how, as a professional organization, we need to be working on the other end of things to help those people who are applying find jobs that can use their great skills. So it's been it was an amazing outcome. Like we got an awesome person who's fitting great with the team. And I got to read a lot of resumes and a lot of cover letters, and I'm happy to share all of my um, opinions about them with y'all. Uh, but it was also sobering, I think.
Well, I want to pause there. I want to thank you, Megan, so much for sharing a little bit about like what brings you to this Zoom table, so to speak. But also, I'm going to come back to that, talk about what we've learned from reading resumes and application materials. But first, I want to go to Kathleen and see, Kathleen, what have you learned and what are your hot deets you want to share?
So I've been on obviously both sides applying to and then reading applications, whether they're for internships, for contract positions, choosing bids, choosing grant awardees. And one of the things that I find is that a lot of people don't have anyone else read over their cover letter and their resume. And you want to find someone who doesn't know you super well, right? So if you ask your mom or your best friend or your work buddy, like, can you read this for me? Their mind is going to be filling in the blanks for everything you don't say about yourself, right? And so they know that you're great at doing X, Y, and Z, but you may not be saying that in your cover letter and your resume. And so you want to find someone that knows you just enough that they're willing to do this for you, and you can do it through an exchange. A lot of professional networks have exchanges. If you've graduated from a university, most universities do let you still use their career services years and years after you've graduated. And so a lot of it is finding someone to help you make you shine, because a lot of us don't talk ourselves up enough. And that's something so much that I see in helping my students, helping other professionals, is that people don't want to overstate how good they are. And I see that way more than I see the other side. And so that's something that I really encourage people to do, is like, you are exceptional, right? You are qualified for this job and you're selling yourself short. And there's no way for me or Megan or Sierra, when we're reading hundreds of these, to know how to fill in the blanks if you're not telling us. So you need to be very direct and signpost, like, tell us all these great things about you. And that's why having someone that knows you but not super well, so their mind isn't filling in the blanks that you're not telling them, right? Because if I read Megan's application, I would be like, well, I've worked with Megan for years, like I know her, so of course I know she's great at, right?
One thing we did, as I felt so terrible reading 100 good applications and not being able to hire 100 great people, that I offered to give feedback on those applications from people who didn't, go to the next phase or whatever. And I ended up, I think probably 20 or 30 people asked for feedback. So I went back and I gave those applications and resumes a little more care and gave them a few points that I thought, could really have maybe not changed the game, because we had some sort of specific requirements for this particular position, but would have tidied things up a little bit and probably made a little bit better impression. And I found that really rewarding. So NCPH is actually looking into developing a resume review service. Our professional development committee is working on that right now. That'll be like a year-round thing. So you're totally right about just getting a totally different perspective from someone who does not know you.
I would agree with that 100%. And just like coming up behind you two, I actually had the pleasure of hiring every member of the Museum Hue team in the last year or so, and then also just coming off of hiring interns at Poster House, which was my last position. In our second year, we had 900, like almost 1,000 applications for our internship program for 4 spots. And so I would say that like one thing I took away from the internship process was like, definitely follow the instructions, because when you get to a point like that where it's 900, sorry, I'm in my co-working space. When you get to 900, they are looking for anything to call her.
You have to. Like, realistically, I don't care if you made a typo, right? Like, I don't think it really reflects your ability or your writing skills or anything. Like, anyone can make a typo. But when I am working with 134 applications for one job, eventually you have to get a little bit kind of brutal. Like, you have to really get, you find small things. And I don't know that it really serves anyone. It's just the reality of the quantity, right?
Yeah.
So I think hopefully what we can accomplish today is to help you find those little things that can set you apart and keep you in that pool, right, for as long as possible.
Yeah. And
no one needs to interview, it's your business.
Your interview's you. But I would say like the first thing I would say for folks, if you wanted like a hard concrete tip, is that whatever instructions they give you, please follow them to the T. So that means if they are telling you a subject line for the email that you're sending, if they are asking you to name your document a particular way, if they're asking you to send in your document as a PDF or as a Word document, every detail.
If I have to convert a Word doc to a PDF, like, obviously it's not that hard. I can do it and I will do it. And I'll even conceal it from the rest of the team. Like, I won't, I'll give you the best shot I can, but I will remember. And so when it comes down to you or somebody else, that might be that one little thing that makes the difference.
Absolutely. I would say that with that group of 900 that I was working with, the first pass was just removing people who hadn't followed instructions. So it was literally, we went from 900 to like, I think 750, just removing people who hadn't saved it as a PDF, who hadn't saved it in the correct format. And in that role, we also had moved into anonymous hiring. And so if you had not followed the instructions to anonymize your resume or materials, that was another mark against you. And it's very, and I know that like for folks especially, and I would love Kathleen and Meghan to hear your thoughts on this as well. When you're applying for jobs, you're not just applying for like one or two jobs. It's like I think my last job search process, I applied for over 100 positions.
Yeah.
Yeah, with one. Yeah.
I was taking notes before this conversation, and I was thinking about how really this whole process starts with the job search, right? But more specifically, it starts with the organizing the job search. Like, I think people could, like, maybe I'm a little bit crazy with my spreadsheets, but like, boy, start a spreadsheet, man. Have a spreadsheet, notate every job you apply for and when the due date is and what materials you need and any special instructions, and then follow them, track that job through the process, right? So note if you get an interview, note if you get a rejection. It's useful for remembering to follow up with an email after an interview. Like, make that your Bible, right? Because the more organized you can be, the less painful it will be to do that bulk of applying, but also the better your results will be in terms of, like, we had a few people who applied who were clearly using a cover letter and then just like modifying it for different organizations, which is fine. That's okay. But they didn't change the name of the organization. So, it didn't say National Council on Public History. It said whatever they had submitted for before.
So my
little organizational details like a spreadsheet can really help you in the down the applying process. So
if you have like a master file, like this is your master one, that your cover letter, and then you edit it for each one, put and I'll type it in the chat. So like put carrots and then the name of the organization, and the carrots are the little like triangles that go each way. And so then that way you can just search it. And so you search your final document for those two carrots that come up. And so then everything that's specific, so like the specific reason for why you want this job that you have in the last paragraph, right? Put that in those carrots. And so then you could always search that, right? Because if you do parentheses, that comes up in something else. If you do highlighting, you might miss it, right? But if you have it, so then it just goes through, and that's what you do for anything that you need to edit or you need to go back through later, right? So I've gotten cover letters and resumes from people that say like, fill in important bullshit detail here, right? And then they forget to do it. And like, we understand we're human. I have also made terrible mistakes in emails and in cover, right? But it's something that if you have a system that's straightforward, that you can just do a Control F and search, that makes it a lot cleaner. And that's something that, like, just develop whatever system works for you. So if there's a different symbol than the carrots, that's great too. But just set up a system, use it going forward.
And then when they ask you in the interview, when's a time that you set up an organizational system to serve your work, you can say, when I applied for this job, and here's my spreadsheet or whatever, and here's the tool that I used, and here's the system I developed. And like, everything can be fodder for work experience, including the process of trying to get work experience.
Well, that's real. So in talking about how to search for a job, that's something that I think is really important to sort of think about, especially if you're an emerging professional or still in school, or if you're wanting to switch careers, is if you have time, right? If you are unemployed and you desperately need a job, do not spend the time doing this. But if you have the time to take 2 or 3 days and think about it, like, take yourself out to coffee, buy yourself whatever drink is your favorite, sit outside if the weather permits, right? And think about like, what do you need to function and be a happy human being and be a healthy human being in a job, right? Because once you're in the thick of applying for jobs, it's really hard not to just apply to a million. And then that's really hard to keep your sanity when you're doing that. But go through and think about, okay, this is the amount of money that I need to live, right? These are the cities that I want to live in. This is like, figure that out before you are in the fog of applying for jobs. And that helps you decide what jobs to apply for and what jobs to spend that time really tailoring that cover letter, right? And so if you know what are the priorities for you, sort of think about, okay, if I know that I want to make a career switch in the next 3 years, right? Monitor the
Mhm.
job boards now. Is there a job that comes up that is in the field that you want, that has the skills that you need, that's in the locale that you want, that pays the amount of money that you need to live? And if one doesn't come up in like the 3 months that you're looking, it's probably not going to come up in the, next 2 years that you're wanting to go through. So that's when you can kind of take the time now to reassess, like, what skills do you need to get that you don't have for those jobs, right? Or if it's not the right salary band, you need to get different skills so you can move up to the next level.
I totally agree that if you can afford it, and I know this is a privilege not everybody has, but especially if you have like a double income or you have a little bit of a cushion or you can live with family or whatever, remember that job searching is a two-way thing. Like, you are not trying to get a job, you are trying to get the right job that fits you and that you're the right fit for. So it's not just about you desperately applying to get a job. Hopefully, in an ideal world, it's about you being thoughtful about what you need, using filters so you don't even see jobs that don't provide what you need, and then really setting about demonstrating in your materials how you're the right fit, and then in the interview portion specifically, ascertaining whether they're the right fit for you, because it really has to be a mutual thing for a job to be like worth your time and shine.
Yeah. And I rank jobs, right? So I rank them by
Mhm.
interest level. And I only I only spend the time on the applications for the ones that I have really high interest levels in. And then I spend a medium amount of time on the ones with medium, and the low ones are the ones where they kind of just get the form, because you're a human with limited time and resources, and like, your health and sanity is important. And that's something that it's really hard not to get stuck in that cycle of, well, I have to spend every minute that I possibly can on every application. And it's really hard to do that for a sustained period
Especially
of
in like
time.
the nonprofit field where there's a sort of, I think that this is kind of fading, but there has been a long-standing sort of sense that the work itself is the reward and the pay, right? And that you should feel so good about the work that you do that it is enough to make up for a bad job. By which I mean, a job that doesn't pay enough, a job that doesn't treat its employees right. Like, nonprofit workers, I think, have been trained to accept a lot and take whatever they can get and be happy. And we're really trying to push against that now, I think, and be like, no, actually, you have a right to expect certain things from employers. Um, a job in another field is better than a bad job in a nonprofit. Like, a good job doing almost anything else is better than a bad job almost anywhere. And it doesn't go away just because the work is important or feels good, right?
I co-sign that 100%. I think that, like, what you said before about like thinking about what it is that you need from the job that you're looking for, I think that self-discovery process is one of the most important things you can do for yourself, because otherwise you're going to be wasting your time applying to anything and everything, and it may not even serve you. And so I have one. I literally, it's on my board right above my wall, where it's like I can see the pros and cons that I've had for the last few years um, for a job. And like, this was in 2019. So this started off as I wanted a hybrid job. I wanted a job that allowed me to go to museums and conferences. I wanted a job that gave me opportunities to, network and be out in the field, and all of those things come into consideration when I start looking for jobs again. Like, I'm going back to that list and modifying it as I go through. The other thing I would say for you is, as you're building out your spreadsheet, these things that we're telling you, it's a spreadsheet, it's a workbook. So you can have one sheet dedicated to ranking, as Kathleen and Megan are talking about, and another sheet just to tracking how those application processes are going. And then you can also have a separate spreadsheet for the skills that you're working towards. So if you are an intern now hoping to go into an education position, you can absolutely start looking at education assistant jobs or coordinator jobs and start looking at the skills, as Kathleen was saying. Look at the skills that they are listing on those positions and start working your way up towards those. Um, and I think that right now, I'm going to shout out NCPH and some other organizations, but so many professional organizations offer fantastic professional development opportunities for you to gain some of those skills. I will speak from my own personal testimony that I was able to move into a manager role because I got very actively involved in the New York City Museum Educators Roundtable, and was able to volunteer my time, which again is a privilege, was able to volunteer my time and was supervising um, over 20 volunteers, which then I was able to leverage into management experience. So if you are able to get involved in your professional organizations, that's like a win-win-win. So you're getting networking potential, you're getting an opportunity to get PD. So if you're a member of an organization like Museum Hue or NCPH or AASLH, or I mean, there's so many great ones that are out there, utilize their professional development workshop series as well, attend the conferences. There's many great scholarships and opportunities for funding for those spaces. And yeah, get involved, go to the committees, be engaged, because you're going to meet people. One of my first museum jobs was from someone I met through a professional organization. And you're also going to meet people who are going to be collaborators. Some of my chief troublemakers that I work with and collaborate, and Megan is laughing because she knows exactly what I'm talking about, and so does Kathleen. But the people that I talk to a lot in this sector are people I met through networking in these spaces. So get involved with your professional orgs, and get engaged to get those skills, but also to really build on that network. And I hate to say it, but your network is essential, and not just this field, but any field. It really does help to be engaged and to meet people across the entire country and beyond, to really build on what you're doing. And I
We
see
do a
that as an
speed
intro.
networking. We do a speed networking event at the NCPH conference, which is like speed dating, but for networking. And it's super fun. And every year, um, we usually get someone who gets a job out of it. We've actually had people get hired like at the table before, like mid conversation. I wouldn't say that's like the norm necessarily, but those opportunities are there, and most orgs have ways to help you afford those opportunities. But I mean, obviously, it does take some work and time. Like, there's no way around that. Everything about the job hunting process takes work and time and energy.
Well, LinkedIn is not my favorite, right? No one likes feeling, I mean, maybe someone does. I
It's
don't
better now
personally
that Twitter's
love,
in the trash.
but that's something that it feels, I think, like it feels icky to be like, well, I have to network, or like, am I like abusing this relationship or something like that? And it's like, no, like connect with someone on LinkedIn, right? So like all
Make
of you are
friends.
more than welcome to add me on LinkedIn after this, right? And then you can go through and like, if I have a job posting, I'll put it up there, right? And that's something that if you go to a conference and you really love someone's panel, like add them on LinkedIn and put in a little note, like, I loved seeing your panel at the virtual NCPH where you were talking about the Marvel Cinematic Universe, Sierra, right? And go through and just sort of do that. And you can build it up. And that's something that it takes time. And it, doesn't always, like a lot of people say that like posting on LinkedIn feels like selling yourself, but it is also like, that's where jobs get posted. And so that's something that, I'll have a friend of mine from undergrad that I haven't spoken to in 10 years post a job, and I'll be like, oh my gosh, that is perfect, for my friend so-and-so. And then I'll forward it to them and I'll say, hey, I can refer you. Right. And it's just, it takes 10 seconds out of my day, but that's the sort of networking that's really helpful, is just, you want to be in the back of people's minds when something comes up, they think about you. And I'm always happy to refer people for jobs and try to get that. And something is not as common, obviously, in the nonprofit world, but in consulting and especially in tech, like people get referral bonuses of thousands of dollars, right? And so if I know a friend of mine is looking for a tech job, right, and I have another friend, like they are more likely to get hired and that person gets a referral bonus. And that's something that is so foreign, obviously, to nonprofit, but it's the idea of like, you should reward the employees that are making the workplace better with money. And that's something to think about as well, is like when you're helping people get better jobs, whether it's at your company or in the field, like you're helping make the field better too.
100%. And I think LinkedIn is like this new space, because I would have said, if you asked me like 2 years ago, I would have been like museum Twitter, public history Twitter is where it's at. Like that's where I've met so many people.
But now,
yeah, we're all scrambling. We're actually considering, this is a little off topic, we're considering like a Slack or a Discord.
Yes,
for members. Like I think that's how a lot of people like to communicate now.
There's a really great preservation Discord.
Is
that's
there?
really good. Yeah,
maybe I'll infiltrate it.
The historic preservation Facebook group is beautifully moderated and like a really wonderful supportive space. So I can drop that link in the chat if you are interested in historic preservation. There's a lot of people in public history that are in it as well.
And I'm contractually obligated to plug that Museum Hue has a beautiful membership a membership platform. It includes a forum and chat function. So if you are a Museum Hue member, you can join and be able to speak to fellow Museum Hue members in that space. But yeah, I'm actually part of like quite a few Slack groups that have just like been really helpful for folks to be able to just chat. I've gotten lots of weird things from that space. Like I absolutely like I got like a blender from someone who was getting rid of a blender.
Sold.
I'm getting that. Free like headshots, like people have promoted like referral codes to things. So like it is worth it to just get in, like even if you just like open it every couple of weeks, it's helpful to just read and see what is out there so that you can just like get engaged. I want to go back to a previous thing that we talked about. So we talked about the application process, but I would love to think about like what tips would you give someone who is thinking about redoing or starting a new resume right now in this field? What would make you what makes them stand?
I haven't written a new resume in a long time. So, there are probably new tools I don't know about. But I have some like core beliefs, I guess. One of which is that I think too simple is better than too complicated. Like, I think there can be a temptation to get a really like elaborate template and like go to town and make it look really snazzy. And there are instances when I think that's appropriate. Like for this time around, NCPH was hiring someone. We were looking for someone to do our social media in part. So we were looking for someone with some graphic design ability. So we were looking for a slightly jazzier resume just that would demonstrate those skills. But in general, I like a simpler resume. I think one page front and back is totally good. I like you to not put personal contact information on it. This used to be a given that you would put your mailing address, and your phone number on a resume. And I don't think you need to do that anymore. There's no reason a hiring manager needs that information from you. Email pronouns are lovely because it does mean that I know how to address you if you get to the interview stage. Like it just takes that question out of it. But you don't need to put your address. There's just no need for that. And that's something that I think has changed in the last couple of years, for sure.
Yeah, I co-signed the no mailing address. That is a space for bias, even though it doesn't seem like it. I have absolutely seen that happen in some spaces. And it also, if you are trying to relocate, that also can create a little bit of friction and confusion for folks. Because if you're like, oh, I'm applying from Maine for a position in California, they're going to be like,
right. It's just information that they don't need. You're an adult. You know whether to you're applying for jobs you can take. Like as a hiring manager, I don't need to know whether you're moving for it or, unless it's coming up in negotiations. It's not a big deal.
The main tip I have for it is that the people reading it are tired, right?
Yeah.
And if you are trying to squeeze in too much information, right? Because we tend to overwrite. So you want to go through and edit it and make sure you choose fonts and have spacing in between everything so the people's eyes can rest, and use visual hierarchy, right? So it should be larger for the subject headings, right? You should have, and like Word uses styles. So you could use a pre-made style. So it's like heading 1 is this, heading 2 is this, heading 3 is this. Use those. And you can edit them if you like don't like the color, or you don't like this, but like those visual hierarchies will make you more likely to be hired because it was easier for someone to read your resume, right? And that sounds really silly, but if it's too crammed in, if there's not enough spacing, people's eyes don't read all of it, especially when you're reading 100 or 800 or 900 resumes. And so a lot of it is thinking about that. And also, like, I do tailor my resume to the job that I'm applying for. And so I have an academic CV, which is stupidly long and full because you like have to list every presentation you've ever done, right? And every class you've ever taken, versus my professional resume, which is much shorter. But for that, I do have the little bio at the top where I give them the short version of like who I am and why what I do matters. And I edit that and steal the keywords from the application and 100%. Pop them right into the top, right?
Keywords are important.
If they're looking for that, that is really essential because, they may not know reading, like maybe you got your undergrad in something completely unrelated and your internship in this. And so give them the cheat code at the beginning with that short, concise little bio that pulls in, right? I know a lot of you guys, when you're applying for jobs, you sometimes have to get through automated readers that use certain keywords. Have those all the way at the end of your resume. If you clutter up the main part of your resume with all those keywords and just scattershot all of them, I'm not really going to count your resume because I don't know what you do or what your skills are at that point if you've just thrown in every keyword to get through the automated HR readers like through Indeed and things like that. So you can still have them in your document, but assume a human is going to read it, and the AI bot that's maybe reading it or not doesn't care where in the document it is, but I as the human do care where in the document that word cloud of keywords is.
Yeah, and especially for like bigger museums, I'm thinking places like the Smithsonian that receive a gazillion applications and have a highly automated process, or they have an HR person who's not really an expert in the field doing a first pass. You kind of need to like trick that system or convince that person who doesn't really know a thing about what you do with those keywords a little bit. But I do agree that you can overdo it. It can be a little bit of a bummer when you're, especially like a smaller org and you don't use any of those sorting systems and you can tell that they're like jargony keywords.
And some of it is like, do the work for them, right? So if I know that Meghan has 15 years of experience being an amazing person in this, like, don't make the person who's reading the resume do the math. No one likes doing math when they're reading hundreds of resumes, right? Tell us how much experience you have at the top, right? If you have 1 year of experience, that is also fine, right? But I don't want to have to go through and add up like, well, this month to this month and this month to this month, right? Like,
especially with months.
Give us the cheat code, right? You have, you're an experienced professional in this, you have 3 years of experience in this, 6 years of experience in that, and something, and you specialize in projects that work on this, right? It can be short and sweet, but make sure you sort of do the signposting for the tired person that is probably reading.
That's so good. That's so, I'm learning things here. I'm like, man, can I find a job to apply for just to like test this? Like, that's really good. I like that a lot.
I love this feedback because I have been and I think like this is an important moment for folks to kind of like, so Kathleen, Meghan, and I obviously do not work in the same space and also have different like hiring practices. It's also really important to note that like you're going to encounter people with different hiring practices and expectations. So like Kathleen is talking about an objective, like giving you like a little summary at the top of your resume and within your cover letter. I don't like an objective on a resume. I think it takes up space. I think that like I would rather read through your stuff and get a sense of like the month and the year that you're there. I want to like see how long you stay. I will do the math, but that's because I visually need to see it. I'm like, you can tell me 6 years, but I want to read it. But again, that's a difference between the between like just like the people in this chat right now.
Sure. You will find 20 people with 20 different opinions about resumes and cover letters, right? Like there's no Bible, there's no authority. It's just personal preference. And then a few like generally agreed upon best practices. Like obviously edit your resume.
One hot tip. Go.
So my number one tip, if you work in public history or any sort of job where you're talking about working with the public, is do Control F for pubic, because the number of resumes I have seen that have say, I am an expert in pubic history. I love working with the pubic in museums, right? And you can search Google Scholar for pubic history, right? Tons of people have it. There's a university whose departmental webpage for public history was misspelled without that key L, right? But that's something that like, that's just key Control F search for commonly misspelled words that very much change the meaning.
That's my last act on any document that I publish is a Control F for pubic. And I found some. Like, no one's above it. No one is above it.
No, I think everyone makes that like one mistake in their resume. I don't know if y'all have done this, but I have gone back and read cover letters for jobs that I have gotten or things I've applied for, and I've been like, oh no, the typos.
Do you guys know Denise Maringolo, probably through NCPH? Brilliant historian, wrote an amazing open access work about sort of radical public history. Definitely there was a pubic in there. Like after publication. We've all done it, like all the way up to the top, right? But if we can save someone that humiliation here, that would be great.
So before I talked over Kathleen, I would say that the one very agreed upon thing that we are moving away from in a sector is, it's been coming back, it's been sneaking back in, but I want to stop it. Don't put your photo on your resume.
Yes.
I know you think it's cute. I know these templates on Canva and on all these places are giving you the option. Do it. Don't do it.
No, if you want to put a picture of your pet, I'm into that. Like that
Hashtag
would put you
public
in
history
a
pets.
follow-up pile. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, I would immediately put you in a follow-up pile if you're like, this was dictated and read to my cat.
Right. For sure. Like, but a personal, like a photo of your face, I don't want to see it. I want to be surprised by your face when we interview you. I don't want that to ever subconsciously affect how I feel about your materials.
It's just a wide space for bias, like absolutely bias. I mean, if you are someone who is on the apps, so to speak, you'll notice that bias immediately. The first thing you're looking at is photos. So you're immediately judging someone based off their appearance. It happens in your resume. So don't do it to yourself.
Right.
Not to say that you're not stunning and you're not a star, but you don't want that to happen to you.
And you don't want to have a nagging question about whether you got hired because you're standing in, like, like that's, I think it's weird in both ways. Like, it's just no good. There's just no good. There's a question for Kathleen in the chat.
Yeah. Yes. So if you have done internships or jobs concurrently, do you count those separately when adding up the time experience to being done at the same time? I do not, because it's still like years of experience, right? And so I wouldn't, especially because like for certain things like public jobs or federal jobs, it is date by date, right? And so even if it's wonderful that you're doing two things at once, it is still bound by time being linear.
And probably one of those is part-time, right? Like if you're doing a job and an internship, you're probably not doing two, like a full-time internship and a full-time job. They probably together add up to a full-time or slightly more than full-time, like hours-wise. I think that's right.
The only time I would count those separately is if you were counting up a particular skill set. So if you were talking in your cover letter saying like, I have 7 years of experience in education and you had an education internship, but your job was in like visitor services, then I'd be like, yes, that I would count that internship towards that time and visitor services would count towards something else.
Right.
Right. But if you were just like time in general, then I would say no.
Yeah, I agree.
But that's a great question, Sarah. And folks, yes, feel free to drop questions in the chat. And as Addison mentioned, there will be time for questions at the end as well. But that was a great question to kind of like kick us off to talking about cover letters. Where do folks lie on them?
I love a good cover letter and I hate a bad one. That's, I'm sure, not a hot take. Like I think that's a pretty standard take. My strongest feeling about cover letters is that they are not just you writing out your resume in long form, right? Like that they are not just, I'm going to take this information and present it in a paragraph, form. It is finding specific experiences and projects and events that you worked and, specific things you've done and connecting those experiences and skills to specific things in the job position that they're asking for. So like, I want to see in X job, I did this. Here was what that experience was like. Here's how what I learned and what I did is going to contribute to my work in this job. And when I say specific, I mean specific. I mean, I want to really know what that was like. And if you can pick, like when you're looking for jobs, if in your spreadsheet, you can pull out like the top 3 skills or duties of the job, right? Like the things that they seem to be prioritizing most highly. Then I go back to those 3 things and I find an example for each of them and I get real specific in the cover letter. And if it's longer than a page, I don't care. Hot take, it can be 2 pages. No one's going to keel over dead if it is a good cover letter. I know. I will read the whole thing if you're telling me relevant stuff. And on the counter side, I will skim it and move on if you're just restating your resume, even if it's 3 paragraphs.
So my key for that is your resume should be telling me why you're a good fit for the job, and your cover letter should be showing me with specific examples, right? So you want to show and tell, and that's why there's 2 different documents. The other thing is for every cover letter or grant application or things like that, I should be able to read, like, and I pull them out to a separate document. So pull out the first sentence from each paragraph and put them in a document, and then pull out the first and a last sentence for each paragraph and put them in a document, I should be able to read just those, and you should be able to get the job from that, right? And that's how you know that somebody is going to be engaged and you're having the key information in a way that people's brains read. And so you just pull out the top. So try it with top, like first and second sentence, or first and last sentence for each paragraph, and then a separate one that just says the first, because sometimes people only read the first sentence, right? And so when you say like, I'm writing to you to apply for this job, right? Instead, say like, as an experienced professional who's passionate about this, 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 and this, I am excited to apply for this job, right? And that's the difference.
Yeah, I 100% agree. I sure was going to say something and I forgot what it was. So I'll just say I agree.
Agree with that. I will also say that for your cover letter, all the things that have been said before around making sure that you're copy editing your cover letter and making sure that if you are reusing your cover letter, that you are making sure it's going to the right place. I would also say that your cover letter is an opportunity for you. I said this in the chat, but your cover letter is an opportunity for you to tease out skills or things on your resume. Early in your career, people are looking for one page, maybe a little over one page. And so if you're like a prolific human being who's out here doing things, one page does not cover the multitudes that you contain. And so if you are involved in like volunteer work, your internships and all these things, to tease out that information, your cover letter is that space. So if you're like, if this position is asking for 7 years of education experience, then if you're like, oh, my internship is on here, but I didn't really write down bullet points about what this is from, that's an opportunity for you to say, in my position here, I did this, in my position here, I did this. And to tell us like where that came from, especially if it's not on your resume. So like for me, someone who does not use an objective or a summary, that would be my space to do that.
Right.
For sure. Also with your cover letter, I don't know if this is like a design hot take. I love when the cover letter and the resume are the same.
Yeah, I agree. Same font. And I also would say, please don't double space your cover letter. I saw a surprising number of cover letters that were double spaced because this was an entry-level position and students were applying for the position, which is totally fine. I welcome, it was a position that was appropriate for new professionals and people who just graduated. That was totally fine. But when you double space something, it tells me you're in student mode. Like that's what you would do when you submit a paper to a professor, right? So they have space to like write in the margins. And it just doesn't look as professional. I hate the word professional, honestly, but like that's kind of, right? Like
polished.
It doesn't look as polished. It doesn't look as ready for the job. It looks like you're still in student mode. And that's something that I tried not to let it like be explicitly a thing I was taking into account, but I'm sure that it lingered in my head and made me feel a certain way about those applications. So like just single space.
Single space.
So
nice, readable, accessible font, not too small,
It must be 11 point or higher.
Yeah, 11. I like 11.
We'll go.
Yeah.
So
keep in mind that people reading those letters may have accessibility issues that, as well. Like people who hire for positions have those things. Like I'm wearing glasses. I can't see for crap. So help me out.
So my number one tip for editing is that our brains are dumb and our brains lie to us and they fill in information that's not there, right? And they make it look prettier than it is. So when you write your resume and your cover letter, go for a walk, like do something, then go back and do a save as, and save it as a totally different document, and then totally change the font size and totally change the font and totally change the font color. And it will trick your brain into thinking you are not the one that wrote it because it looks so different. And I guarantee you will go through and you will find so much more. And also it's a setting in Word, you can change it. So instead of a white document with black text, you can change it so it's a blue document with white text. I still also suggest changing the font size and the font type so it looks also more different, but that is a way that you can go through. And if you don't have someone to go through and double check it for you, you can trick your brain into thinking that it's not something you just wrote.
I do that all the time in my own writing, not just like applications, but like all the writing I do for work. By the time you finish writing, you're like, that was awesome. I'm so great. And then you leave for a little bit. You're like, wow. And then you leave for a little bit. You come back, you change up the font, you switch up the color, you go sit in a different place. and you're like, who's this dummy? Like, who let her do this? Like, you just catch a lot of stuff. So that's awesome advice.
Yeah, and read it aloud. It's harder to do that for a resume because there's bullet points, but still do read it out loud to yourself, which is a very painful experience to do.
Or to your cats. Read to your cats or dogs.
Read your cats, right? Read to the ghost decal that you have in your window. Right. And go through, as Sarah said, the Microsoft Read function, right? If you struggle to say it in a sentence because a sentence is too long, that is a red flag, right? If when it goes through and it sounds clunky, right? And so these
your
are all
tenses change. Tense changing is a thing that is really easy to do for even incredibly experienced writers.
Oh, tense changes is actually, that's a great point. And I'm going to deviate for a hot second, take us back to your resume. When you are writing about positions that you had in the past, move your tense into past tense, kids. Do not have it as present tense. If you're currently in the role, present tense. If it's in the past tense. I promise that's like, one, it's cathartic for you because you're like, that's behind me.
We're done with that life.
We're no longer planning. We planned.
I think it's a hard lesson to learn because, especially in the history field, we use the historical present all the time, right? Like we're writing about present tense about things that happened in the past because it's like a sort of function of historical writing. But unfortunately, resumes and cover letters live in the real world, and we need to kind of get rid of that historical present and back to the regular rules of writing.
Sorry.
So I think we talked a little bit about interview prep, and that's something. So when I was on the academic job market, our department actually hired someone who teaches political candidates how to respond to questions. And we all got sessions with her, and it was terrifying because she was very, very qualified. And you should make sure that every time you are answering a question, you are giving them one of 3 key points about you for why you're qualified for this role, right? So even if the question seems unrelated to your experience, you want to draw them back. And it's because, again, human brains are dumb and we don't remember things well. And you want to give people these little like keywords or key phrases to help them remember why Megan or Sierra are going to be the best candidate for this job. And so if you're applying for, say, a museum education role, right, figure out what are the 3 top points for why you are qualified for this role, write them on a Post-it note, read them before the interview. If it's a Zoom interview, pop it up and a little Post-it note behind so you can reference it. But for every job that you get the interview for, you should be able to articulate what are the 3 key reasons for why they should hire you and try to work those into the conversation for those interview questions. So then they remember, oh, this person is the candidate and they're qualified for this, 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 and this, right? But if you yourself have not sat down and figured out why are the top 3 reasons you should be hired for this job, how can you expect a stranger to get that takeaway if you yourself have not taken the time to articulate why this is the right role for you?
I want to zoom back just because I got a question in the chat and I want to address it before we move too far on. Someone said that I mentioned there were close to 100 strong resumes and cover letters for the position we hired for, and we only interviewed 6 applicants. And what made those 6 people stand out from the rest of the applicants? So totally true. We got probably like 90 applicants that I think would have been good at the job. Maybe not perfect for the job, but like it was an entry-level job, so we expected to do some training. But 3 things. The first was that their materials demonstrated a really clear understanding of what the job was. Because a lot of people are applying for a lot of jobs, I think it gets easy to get confused about what those jobs entail and what the job the employer is asking for. We worked really hard to write a very clear job description that was very explicit about what that work would look like. And so when people showed in their materials that they really understood that work and could connect it to their experiences, that was a huge green flag. The second one, and ordinarily we would not be this way, but is appearance of the materials. Usually that's much further down the list for me, but in this particular case, we were hiring someone, we needed to have some sort of graphic design ability. A lot of people talked about their graphic design skills. The people who also showed it with very clean, well-spaced, slightly interesting, but not too interesting kind of formatting, stood out to us for sure, because it was another way that they demonstrated that skill, not because of just like it was pretty. And then the third would be the cover letter and really being explicit and specific about how they're, skills or whatever are connected, and what they've done in the past that would contribute to what they would do with us. I think it's a very common mistake for entry-level jobs, especially, that they do just sort of restate the resume. So we got a lot of those where I could tell from the resume that they would be good at it, but they didn't give me anything more than that to work with in the cover letter. So those 3 things I think would be the big ones for that particular job. It's different for every job.
Yeah. And I would say that if we were sitting here trying to think about what were experiences that you've had in the hiring process that made an applicant stick out to you, I would say for me, one of the first ones that stuck out to me was someone who had a really interesting resume. I was hiring for a design museum, so like the girlies love design, and then I was also really impressed with, like, they had done research on me. So if they very clearly, if the person who's hiring or the person that is receiving your materials is listed, if you're able to do a little search on them, I do see you all looking on LinkedIn, and that's fine. But if you do a little search and see what that person is, you can connect things back and see, like, okay, so I know Sierra's gonna be my hiring manager, and she's really into this. I can tie that back into what I'm talking about in my resume, because I know that she's really into making sure that unpaid internships are abolished. And that's something that I care about as well, and that's something I'll be working on in this role. Don't just tell me that you just like the same sports teams as me. It's a nice plus, but it's not something that's going to like move your application ahead. But if you're able to tie like work things together, or even connections. So again, going back to that networking thing, this is like one of those spaces that, you know, might work, it may not work. So I would say that I haven't had the opportunity to do this, but if someone had applied and said, I am also from the same program as you, I would take a second look at their resume. It doesn't mean that you're going to make it to the final round, but it does mean I will be like, oh, a fellow alum. I will take a little peek at this. I know folks who do that for fraternities and sororities as well. Folks who have connections through, again, networking professional organizations, whatever it takes to like note that you are to kind of like show that you are engaged and like and passionate. So again, I am looking to see if if you're engaged in the field, and if you're like, oh yeah, I saw your conference session because I'm also an NCPH member. I might take another look at your material.
And it's not even just like networking, it's like being vetted by someone else. Like what happens when you're from the program that I'm from, or you know, have been to the conference I've been from, or you presented somewhere that I know is, you know, fairly competitive. That tells me you've been vetted by other people. And because we're a small team, I value all of those, you know, all of that information to help me get a more complete picture of an applicant.
Yeah. And if you have someone who's able to refer you, that is also another plus. So if you are like, oh, I'm applying for this job with Megan, and I know Sierra. Sierra, can you write me a little referral? I am so happy to email Megan and say, hey girl,
what's up?
Job. They're incredible. Again, it's not your application materials have to put you into the running in the first place, but that little referral is going to give Megan a plus to be like, okay, so this person is about it, because Sierra took the time out of her day to tell me that they are about it.
Yeah, and I think for like a quantity of applications, at the end you're trying to be the right person for the role, but for those first few rounds of cuts, you're trying to not be the wrong person. You know, you're trying to get through to the next round so that they can give you more attention and have, you know, with a fresh eyes. So you're trying to avoid mistakes. You're trying to not do anything obviously like, you know, egregious, and you're trying to give them as much evidence as you can in a succinct way that you're a good fit.
Absolutely. So I know that we are like at 6:30, and so I want to make sure that there's time for folks. If you haven't asked us a question in the chat, to please feel free to. We have lots of things that we want to share out with y'all. But and truly, Megan, Kathleen, and I can talk forever about things that we've seen and are interested in.
Oh, one more thing, because Megan and I were talking about this on Twitter. So
yes, thank you.
Name your documents in a polished way. So I have gotten ones that have said like, I hate this job, whatever. And then that's what they have sent in. right? So you want it to be last name underscore first name underscore cover letter, right? You want it to be clear so when they're looking for it, they don't have to retitle it, right? And they may still, and if they have instructions for how to title it, follow that, but it should contain your first and last name and what the document is. So cover letter, resume, writing sample, design, design portfolio, whatever it is, but make sure that it is telling us what is going to be inside of the document. And also that goes for what your email address is. So I have gotten email addresses when they're applying for professional jobs that are not appropriate words to have in an email address, right? And that goes for what your profile photo is and your email address as well, right? So make sure that I don't have to like file a Title IX as a university employee if you're sending, right? Just make it easier for everyone, and just make sure it is like set up a new email address if it's the one you've had for forever, that is an appropriate email to get work-related stuff sent to.
100%. And two things to add on. First of all, please make sure your resume and your cover letter use the same formatting so that they sort together when you sort by name. Because what we're going to do in some cases for smaller orgs, what we did is we stick them all in Google Drive and then we distribute that link to our reviewers. So when you sort by name, if I have to rename your document so that they appear next to each other, I'm sad. Like that's a lot. I had to do a lot of renaming. So last name underscore cover letter, last name underscore resume. I don't even need a first name necessarily. But just make sure they match. And then when it's your email address, this is I freely admit, a little silly maybe, but I have a bias that I cannot control against Yahoo email addresses. Email addresses that are no longer on like a secure server, Hotmail, yeah. It tells me, and it's not an age thing because I'm 35. Like it's not about that. It's about you're telling me that you aren't keeping up with the technology. You're not aware that that's really no longer like a service that is protecting your information. Like it's a very small thing that I notice 100% of the time. And if we're looking for tiny little things, it could be a tiny little thing. So get a Gmail. Even if you only use it for work stuff, just get a Gmail or use, Outlook's fine. But like nothing that outlived its technological usefulness like a decade ago. Yes, and school emails, because you will lose access to that.
You will lose access unless you are me, who has your Amazon and your Notion attached to your graduate school email, and so it's still active.
Nice.
I'm running a long con, but I would say yes. As you leave school, move away from your school email. That's one of the best tips one of my mentors gave me. Like that senior year, we were doing portfolio review. She was like, "Everyone, sit down. If you do not have a clear Gmail that is your first name, last name, and like if you have a really common name, whatever iteration you have to do, underscores, dashes, etc., to make that possible, do it now. Because when you start applying for things, you're not applying with Sierra Van Ryck DeGroot at student.shu.edu."
Oh, Sky has a good question. Sky says, thanks, this is informative. For someone who's attempting to transition into the museum sector but has a lot of experience that is transferable, would you recommend placing experiences that you may already have in the museum world first, or would you recommend highlighting your current work? I think this partly depends on how much experience you have in the museum world. If you have a lot of it and it's fairly recent, then I think it's okay to pick and choose what you have. But I'm also a really big believer in like including stuff that you don't think is relevant on your resume and then proving how it's relevant. Like my husband, I have a true life example of this. My husband was a Starbucks barista for, 3 or 4 years. He was a coffee master there. He got really into doing tastings. He was really good at his job. He then got a job in science, which is his background, and now he works, as genomics something or another. Don't ask me what. But he used his Starbucks experience on his resume and cover letter to explain how the skills that he had there were incredibly transferable and in fact necessary for scientists. Like you would be shocked at how in need they are of people in the sciences. So the fact that he could work with people and took initiative to take on outside projects ended up being a really big boon for his application and set him apart in a really good way. So I would say don't neglect some of your recent experience just because it's not in the field, because that actually matters so much less, especially in a place like museums where you may be called upon to do a very wide range of work. Above all, we're looking for like solid, professional, respectful, quality people, and that can come in any field and looks very different. So,
well, and you can have like, go ahead.
No,
fight about it.
I can follow. We're fight to the death for
rock, paper, scissors, rock, paper, scissors. So you can also have like selected professional experience and then just make clear this is volunteer, this is internship, this was work, right? You don't have to always have them in separate categories. And that depends on who you are and the jobs that you are applying for, right? And sometimes, and it's always frustrating, and I hate that jobs make you guys do this, but when you have to like basically copy paste your resume into their system, if you have to do that, make sure you follow whatever they say, like internships here, jobs here. But if it's your own resume, you can decide. Just make sure that you signpost which ones were paid and which ones were resume, or not resume, which ones were internships, which ones were volunteer, right? And so you can go through, but you could have them all together. I like them being chronological, right? Even if they don't have, so I can get a sense of like your development as a human being, but you can choose how you group them.
Yes, and I have two responses to that. One of them being that you should, what I messaged in the chat, leverage your transferable skills. We had a really long conversation about this with a group of internship coordinators early in the pandemic because someone was sharing that one of their applicants didn't put down some of their experience on their resume because they were told by their school career services to only put relevant experience. And then as they were talking to the hiring manager, one of my friends, it came out that they were like a manager of like a Forever 21 in Times Square. And they were like, I'm sorry, you're applying for an education role. That shows that you have excellent customer service, that you are able to handle high stress environments, that you're able to do all of these different things.
Fast-paced
environment. If you work in Times Square or at a sports stadium or anywhere that's like that quickly paced, I salute you. Anyone I see, if you have summer camp experience, you're already a rock star to me because I know that you've been through the ringer. I know you can handle a tough environment.
I have yet to encounter a non-transferable skill, right? Like, do they like all experience is relevant experience? And if you don't think it is, you just haven't followed that trail back far enough to the root of the job. Like the core, like you may have been trained to be ashamed of certain jobs, I think, by society or by your family or whatever. But I assure you, I would rather hire somebody who managed a Forever 21 than, someone who has only experience in the field, but maybe is a little naive and not super in the real world people. And like good with people, right? Like they're, oh my goodness, so much more important.
Well, Sarah's question about recent graduates, how do you feel about awards or activity sections? So I love those if there is space. So don't let those overtake the meat of it. But like, if you've gotten awards, that is wonderful. Tell us about all the awards. If the activities are activities that paint you in the light that you want to be showing the job, right? You don't ever have to show your hobbies to the people that are employing you, right? Like they don't get to know what you do in your off time. And so if you don't want them to know what your hobbies are, like don't list activities that would disclose something that you don't want to disclose to the employer. Right. But other than that, like share those things. Like if you were student body president, right? Or you manage this club, like those are all good things and include them. And we love seeing, or at least I do. I know someone else might say like, don't show your hobbies.
If you organized and managed a zine, for example, that made it all the way to publication, a very rare occurrence for zines, I already know you're the most qualified person in this pool. Like you've already done the impossible. Tell me that so that I can give you my job, right? Like there are certain hobbies that if you're comfortable sharing are 100% super relevant and skills based, and I think really deserve a place on your resume over, something that's not as exciting to you. Like I also want to know you as a person. This is how I feel about cover letters too, is like I'm totally okay with a little bit of informality. This is probably a institution to institution kind of thing. Like not everybody agrees, but I would rather not see jargon. I would rather not see kind of cliches. I would rather see genuine enthusiasm and personality. And I think people can be kind of scared out, especially by like career services people at universities who don't know the field you're going into, trying to make everybody fit really one mold that is not the norm, I think, for our field.
Yeah. Well, and the last, I know we're going out of order. One of the tips is quantify as much as you can, right? So if you were working in a museum, like how many collections did you index, right? Like how many materials did you work with? What was the average number of visitors per day? Like people like seeing numbers because it helps us understand, right? And so the more that you can add, like, you know, you redesigned the internship process to ensure that the 300 interns that were coming, you know, whatever number you can do, tell people that. And so for the bullet points that you have, and especially in your cover letter, go through and show us the details, right?
Yeah, you're applying in theory for a job that we all understand pretty well. Like we are hopefully enthusiastic about the work and genuinely interested in it. And I want to truly get into that with you. Like I'm especially, you know, as we get into the cover letter and then the interview, I want to really talk shop with you. And if you can kind of walk that walk already in your materials, you've got a head up.
Yeah, your materials should make me want to talk to you and ask you more questions, right? Your materials are what gets you to that application stage. So if you tell me like, I did research on this project, something, like tell me something about why that project is important or interesting. And so then I can go to you and say, I would love to hear more about this project that you did in this neighborhood to work with this community.
And people in this field are already so well prepared to do that, right? Like we already work in thesis statements. We already work in museum text, right? Where we have to be really concise and get a point across really easily. We already are so kind of suited to writing these materials. We just don't think of it that way. I think like it takes on a sort of larger than life place in our mind because of how stressful it is. And so I always like to kind of take it back to basics of writing and being like, what is my argument? Like, what is my supporting evidence? Like, it's very much in the line of like what historians are already doing.
I would say along that line, if you are someone who likes to take a risk, because you think that you have done your research, you've looked up about the organization, you have a sense of like what the team is like, the organization is presenting maybe a little more casual, they seem a little more fun, and you're willing to take risks in your materials, I think that could be something that sets you apart. For years, this is no longer my resume because now I'm a little higher up in the field, which is depressing. But but when I was very early, something that set me apart, and multiple people have told me this, is that I used to have like little jokes implanted in between my bullet points. And so like it would be like all the things that I did. So like down to the numbers, you like served XYZ school trips and like did all the trained in all this. And then it would be like often found in the galleries covered in glitter, doing tableaus, which is like not wrong, but it's just like a really casual bullet point where people who had read my resume and were more like in the case like Meghan and myself, where we are literally reading every single application, it was just like a little fun tidbit where I was like, this person is funny.
Yeah, it displays a level of confidence, I think. Like I don't need it. Like, I don't require you be funny in your cover letter, and I'm never gonna like ping you if you're not funny. But it's absolutely true that when we say like a good culture fit, I think sometimes people think we're being like cagey and like trying to be like exclusive and like, you know, and that's really not what it is about, or at least what it shouldn't be about. It's about um making sure that you have the same sort of general vibe about, you know, your approach to the work, you're collaborative, you are fun to be around for 40 hours a week or whatever. Like those are not small things. It's a lot of time. So when we talk about like being a good cultural fit, I think those are the things we really intend to say, is that you can hang, but also are serious about the work.
And it is a risk, but it is something that like it can pay off if that is like what the workplace is representing as like that's this way. If I was putting my resume through an ATS system, I don't use that same resume.
No, for sure.
I have like 7 different versions of my resume.
And you can tell by looking at someone's social media. Like look at an org social media, you're gonna tell really fast whether they can hang in that way specifically.
Exactly. Oh, the most important thing, this is not on your application materials, but something that like we in 2023 are absolutely looking at is your social media. if I can look up your name and see every single social media account that you have, it better be locked down and tip top. It's not even a matter of like professionalism, honestly, at this point. It's just like it's visible. So a lot of times people post your name and information on the company website, etc. If you are getting into like cage fights on Twitter, that may not be what that person, like what the hiring team is looking for.
Or maybe it is.
People will look for any
Bring
but,
it.
I want to know that you can stand up in a fight.
Exactly.
But all of that to say, like, people want to make sure that they at a certain point that people are looking for anything to disqualify candidates, and it's not always what is in the material. Sometimes it's just how you're representing yourself online, and it's not the most equitable thing. But if you do have social media, do your little checks. If you got a Facebook, what can the public see? If you're on Twitter, what can the public see? What can the public see from your LinkedIn? Because if like people who are in the hiring committee can see it, clients can see it, future partners can see it, all these people can see it. So you want to make sure that you're always having your best foot forward, and you have to make a choice about what your online presence is going to be. I lean a little spicy, but that's like part of my brand. I've earned a brand.
Yeah.
But if you're very early, I did not have the same brand early in my career. I was much more locked down. So
when you can have more than one, right? So like
that's what I did. I created a secret, or rather, I had an old Twitter, and then I created a professional Twitter, and then I used my married name that I never took as my old name, and then it was the whole thing. It's a very elaborate like house of cards that could come crashing down at any moment. But
yeah, but this doesn't mean you can't have like social media, right? Because what you do in your own time is your own time, but also make sure that when someone Googles you, what comes up is what you want to come up.
Yeah, just don't be a liability, basically.
Yeah,
and if you're applying for a job that requires social media, you should have some social media. Part of the job we hired for was social media, and a surprising number of people did not even have a Twitter that I could find. And like, how am I supposed to know that you can like hack it in that space? It's not an intuitive like work. Social media work is real work. It is skills-based work. It's not just a vibe, right? So when people didn't have that, I was like, that's a red flag for me for sure.
Yep.
Just because of the job itself required you to do it.
Absolutely. So in these last 9 minutes, is there anything that we did not touch on that you are like, the people must know about the entire hiring process? I think Kathleen brought up an excellent point earlier that people who are reviewing from the perspective of hiring managers, we're tired. We see hundreds and hundreds of applications. I think that keeping that in mind is real, but I think also for an applicant, I also know that you also are putting in hours and hours of time into making sure your applications are going out. So understanding it's a two-way street and that there is mutual respect is important in that process for me.
Yeah. Well, we want you to succeed, right? Like we're not sitting there going like, he, they did this typo, right?
Like we're not taking our red pen and like shredding it or anything.
Yeah, but it's the way that capitalism works, right? Makes it so it is hard to be a human being in spaces that don't prioritize humanness and kindness. And so people want to do that as much as possible, but the more you can make it easy, when you're titling it with your last name, so you don't have to title it, those things do matter.
And kind of along the lines of like, a job shouldn't just be a job, it should be the right job. Like you have the right to be respected in the job hiring process. Like if an org doesn't email you and thank you for and like let you know that they received your materials, if they don't email you to let you know you haven't made it to the next phase of interviews, like those are red flags to me that you can find a better job. Like, yeah, so every once in a while it is a case of the org just being too big or like having too many divisions to like communicate. Like there are levels of bureaucracy, but in general, a human being should email you and tell you either, yes, you've made it to the next round, or I'm sorry, we've decided to move forward. You deserve closure and you deserve to not be left hanging on for months or, forever.
I mean, I got an email for a job I applied to 5 years ago, letting me know they'd move forward with a different candidate. And it was like, I hope so.
Figured
it's
that
been
out.
5 years.
I sure hope you did. But I just think it's so dehumanizing to apply for jobs and not hear. Like, it's just such an unkind unhuman way to like evaluate a person. Like it just doesn't feel good. And if a job doesn't feel good in that early stage when they should want you, like it wasn't worth your time anyway. Like
Absolutely.
just wipe that one off your brain and move on.
And you should always feel like, I know this is also sounds like it's coming from a place of privilege, but honestly, as I've gone up through the field, it has become increasingly important to me to remember that you can also leave a hiring process. You do not have to continue to go through an interview process that you do not feel like is right for you. If you want to continue to get experience, that's totally fine. There's no better way than real practical experience. But there's a point where you realize that either you are wasting your time or you're wasting their time, and you could take a step back. Or you might just get into the process and be like, I'm not doing a 7-page assignment for this. Like this isn't related to the role. I don't want to do this. Like I'm out. And that's okay. Like I know it might be. It's up to you to decide what value your time. You know the value of your time and the work that you're putting into the application. Do not think that you have to give so much of yourself to every single job interview process.
And here's the beautiful thing about this field. Oh, go ahead.
Just be wary of the companies that ask you to perform labor for them that then they can use for free. So I've had people I know that apply for jobs. They're like, well, do rebranding for us.
No.
Right. And then they take what the rebranding you did, right? Or design a tour for us or design whatever. And it turns out that they're not actually hiring. They're using that to get free labor where they don't have to pay people. Right. And so if you realize that that is happening, like you can step back and decide not to do it. You can also decide to do it and be like, maybe they're still hiring and go through with it. And that is also a fine choice. But know that there are really unethical organizations and companies that view the hiring process as a way to get free labor from applicants.
And here's the beautiful thing about the field that we're in. It will be there whether you work in it or not for you to enjoy. Like, like if you are not being respected, if you are not getting answers back and you've submitted hundreds of resumes and you are tired and you are not feeling good about it, go be an accountant and then go to museums on your days off. You know what I mean? Like find a job that pays the bills, that has, with a company that respects you, and then history will be there for you. Art will be there for you. Museums will be there for you to enjoy as a normal person. Like that's always going to be an option. Hopefully, I assume. So I think a lot of people get really caught up in the like fear of like, I went to grad school and I did all this work, and what if I never get hired in the field? And then what if you don't? Like, it's a day job for everyone, including people who love their jobs in the field. And I think being really practical about your needs and putting your happiness first and quality of life first above like the sanctity of the work is just really critical. If I didn't have a job I genuinely loved and felt respected in, I would go be, well, not an accountant. I would never be an accountant because no one would want that for me, but I would go, do something else and go to museums on the weekends and be happy.
I love that. I think that's absolutely spot on. Just like this is work as much as anything else. You might be passionate about it, but this is work. You shouldn't give more of yourself than you have to give.
And I love to see public historians thinking of themselves as workers, just because I think it really creates solidarity. It leads to things like unions that the field desperately needs. So
100%. So in these last 3 minutes, if folks want to sneak in questions, please do. But I also want to take a moment to shout out Kathleen and Meghan. Thank you both so much for being here and sharing your insights. Again, as I can't stress enough, every hiring experience is different, but we hope that these hiring tips are helpful to y'all as you start thinking about your next steps. I highly recommend that you follow some of the links that Amanda just dropped in the chat. Thank you, Amanda. Including our community newsletters and socials. I also would say that you should absolutely follow NCPH. It's one of the most welcoming communities I've ever been a part of. And I'm really grateful for their expertise and guidance that they've provided through my experience. We are doing another Career Jumpstart series session on November 2nd. So please join us for that. Meghan has very generously offered to review materials and provide feedback. So her email is in the chat. So please do copy that and take that with you.
There's other work I would rather not be doing, so you'll be doing me a favor. Don't tell my boss.
Me.
I've got 4 deadlines, so please send me something else.
And also
But
send her a
seriously,
photo of a cute
genuinely,
animal.
genuinely, I have found that I really enjoy that. Like, I find it really
Mhm.
felt like useful and valuable for both of them, like me and the person who's getting their materials looked at. So feel free to email me.
Yes, so please do email Meghan. You're also welcome to email me. I'm happy to look over any materials that you have. I'll drop my email in a moment. And then Sarah asked a great question. Please connect with us on LinkedIn. I dropped in our LinkedIn addresses earlier on, and we'll drop them in when I find that full listing again. But please do add us on LinkedIn. Kathleen is also offering some time for to review. So each of us will take some time to review any materials that you send out. That is a service that apparently people spend. Thank you, Amanda. That's a service that people spend a lot of money on. So please take advantage of free, very experienced, nuanced looks at your resume.
And I will try to connect with you on LinkedIn, but I do regularly forget my LinkedIn password and then avoid it for literally weeks. So if you don't, if I leave you hanging, it is not for a reason. It's just that I lost my password.
I live on LinkedIn.
There's password managers, Meghan. We could talk about that in our next professional development session.
I actually use a really good one, but it keeps like forgetting my info, so it's probably not a really good one. But they do now have a like option where you can like get an email code sent to you, and that has saved my life recently. So
good.
And with that, I thank you all for joining us for our Career Jumpstart Series Session 2. Please come back and join us, or I hope to see you at an NCPH event in the future. Thank you again to the National Council on Public History for co-sponsoring this event and hosting it as a mini con. And folks, I look forward to seeing y'all on LinkedIn or in my DMs. And with that, thank you all. Have a great night.
Good night.
Thanks, everybody.
Good night, everyone.